Hello and welcome back to PSN News. Tonight we have President of the Latino Caucus, Tomás Sanchez, with us. Thanks for being here.
No problem. Happy to be here.
Good. So we heard that UPUA just added three new seats to increase multicultural representation. And how is this important for the Latino Caucus?
Well, I think, I really have to say, with my experience in the UPUA, as soon as I came to Penn State, that was the first organization I joined. Latino Caucus, but that's how I found out about UPUA. And I was a freshman representative, and within my freshman council, there was not a single black person. So I realized that, okay, this is a serious issue, and I noticed that the assembly wasn't as diverse as it probably could be. And throughout my entire time, I had various experiences of realizing that UPUA had some type of disconnect between the organization and the multicultural community. So these seats are very important because I feel as though they really build that bridge that I fought for the past 2 years to kind of have, and I think it really shows that UPUA is willing to have these voices represented, and they want to make sure that those voices consistently are represented, not just in this one assembly, but going forward.
And now, can you tell me the process of getting this legislation passed? Was it difficult?
Yeah, so it definitely was difficult. At the end of the 12th Assembly, Katie Jordan had pretty much brought to the table a resolution that formed an ad hoc committee to evaluate the effectiveness of the special interest seats, which previously referred to the seats that are held by the 4 Greek councils. So there was, in asking for seats, they wanted to pretty much just figure out how effective the special interest seats they do have are, since they are pretty much owned by organizations outside. So it's a very difficult thing, and they wanted to pretty much evaluate the effectiveness. But the biggest problem was that most of the conversations that we were having in the ad hoc committee all were around the Greek seats, and there was though I was a member of that committee, there was no real emphasis on the reason that I wanted to be there. So we had a couple meetings of the ad hoc committee, and I felt as though it just wasn't as productive, and I felt as though the conversation just wasn't really producing anything. So I talked to a few representatives, friends that I had within the assembly, and they brought up the fact that this isn't something that a few people can control. A lot of some of the people that were in the steering committee just felt as though the ad hoc committee should make their determination first. Mm-hmm. But it wasn't really something that I felt like was going to happen anytime soon, and this is a fight that has been going on since way before my time. Black Caucus.
Oh, since before you came to Penn State?
Yeah, literally Black Caucus first asked for representation. They first endorsed a candidate for student government back in 1971 with the promise of hoping that there would be some representation for Black Caucus. And Latino Caucus, the earliest documentation we found was back in 1991, where the Latino Caucus came asking for a seat on the student government at the time, and the president told us that if we wanted to have a seat at the table, we needed to first become an umbrella organization.
Oh, okay. So it was a lot of logistics.
Yeah, it was all a lot of just bureaucratic things. It's as a person of color, you commonly hear that it's just not right now, or there's some issues down the road. But I felt as though with my experience in the UPUA, I knew how to really make this happen, and I knew why it was important. So I felt as though I had the privilege of this experience, and I needed to use it to really move our caucuses forward. Mm-hmm. So that's why I met with a few representatives, and we created legislation to be brought through the Gov Affairs Committee that would pretty much just add these seats, and we can kind of stop the conversation of whether we should have the seats and more move into the conversation of how do we make the best seats.
So I understood you did have a meeting with the UPUA president, Cody Heaton, and it ended unexpectedly. Can you tell us a little bit more about that meeting and the outcome?
I think that meeting, it was originally just to discuss things that were brought up within the first ad hoc committee meeting, because I unfortunately was sick and wasn't able to make it. After we talked about what had occurred in the meeting, we moved into a conversation. I kind of just brought up some points that I wanted to voice with him, since we're two presidents of the organization. I felt as though it was a good time to really get across my points. So I told him we have to move away from the term special interest, that it's very offensive to our communities. I was just kind of trying to make that common ground and come in, but I felt as though once I brought up the issue of my past, when I wasn't elected into the 12th Assembly, I came to Open Student Forum, and I spoke about the need for cultural competency training for faculty and staff. And that was something that I felt very passionately about, but I no longer could pursue as a representative, so I brought it to Open Student Forum. And though representatives came up to me afterwards and were talking about how important this was, and like, thank you for coming, you spoke so eloquently, no one actually followed up to actually pursue this initiative. And I was thinking, this is me, someone who everybody in this assembly has my phone number, and they all know how to contact me. I've done all the research that makes it, all the tough work I've already done because I know what it takes. I just needed someone to take that, and unfortunately no one did. And we started having this conversation, and I was speaking about the importance of representation, and it was clear that he wasn't very comfortable with having this discussion at this time, which I guess is understandable, but at the same time, I thought it was a very good opportunity for us to talk one-on-one about these issues. But he just felt uncomfortable and felt as though he should just remove himself from the rooms. But I mean, we've gotten past that, and I think that going forward, we've talked about this incident, and we've made sure that it would never happen again. And I think going forward, we really do want to work together, and there's no animosity. I've known Cody for a very long time since I got here, so it really wasn't anything more than just like a discomfort with that conversation.
So now I want to ask, because these seats won't be filled until after the spring election, so how will you secure caucus representation in the meantime?
So I think that this assembly is very different from past UPUA assemblies. The 13th assembly, there was only one ticket, executive ticket running. Typically you have at least 2 tickets running, and it becomes more of like a team thing where you have at-larges down the ballot that kind of ride the coattails, and it becomes like a very team-oriented thing. Since there was only one ticket, it allowed Cody to choose pretty much which representatives he wanted in his assembly, in a sense, because at the end of the day, it's about whoever puts the most iPads in front of people. So if you have a whole team of doing that for each other, then all those people are going to come up. So because of that, we have one of the most diverse assemblies I've ever seen. In addition to people of color really showing out, I think like the multicultural community really came together during these elections like I had never seen in UPUA history. And I think that because it wasn't contentious, the voter turnout was very low, which allowed our voices to be heard a lot more. So this assembly is one of the most diverse we've seen. It has some of the best representatives. Like, I have nothing but faith in this assembly, and that's why I was okay when I was writing this legislation to say that we should do this in the 14th assembly, because there's a lot of structural changes that need to be made, both to the constitutions of our organizations as well as the UPUA's constitution. And this is not something that's easy. It's something that needs a lot of work. And in my opinion, our representatives are going to be held to a higher standard than the rest of the assembly. So I really just want to make sure that we're putting in all the constitutional support to make sure that we're having the most representative people who are very effective, because my biggest issue is that I do not want the conversation of whether the caucus seats are effective to ever come up, because that is something that it's just going to create animosity, it's going to create all these issues. So I think that what's important is that all 3 of our caucuses come together and really say, how do we make the best representatives? And I think it's going to really push our organizations forward as well as UPUA.
Okay, and then once you're in government, what steps do you hope to take in terms of what you do, and then also what the Latino Caucus does as well?
So personally, I won't be sitting in these seats just because I think that I kind of made that clear from the beginning. I never wanted this to seem like this was a personal endeavor for me to get a seat just because I wasn't elected in the 12th Assembly. So I never wanted that, but I think these seats are going to be very effective in pushing initiatives that are important to the Latinx community. So I think that we'll be able to do like a lot more and really just be able to bring our initiatives to UPUA and get them fought for and show the multicultural community that UPUA is there fighting for them.
Awesome. Well, thank you for joining us,
problem.
Tomas.
So
thank
happy to
you.
have you.